About what's on my little mind today. And it kind of supports also what we just kind of talked about a little bit. But the tale of Korach's rebellion is very dynamic, and it was very compelling, and it was very intriguing. In fact, it's so powerful that most of us never find ourselves questioning the morality of the outcome. And that's kind of true. We don't. Whoop. So we you don't forget about the fact that there were at least two others that joined him. So Korach had two others, Datan and Aviram. And the three of them openly challenged Moshe's leadership. There were only three. All right? Doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. Korach's focus was on appropriating Aharon's Levitical and priestly privileges. Remember, Korach was a first cousin of them. They were very close family. And he was jealous. He really was. He took it personally that he wasn't in charge. He was jealous. He wanted to be Aaron, Aharon. So it was over the last couple of weeks when we read the Torah, we found Aharon, Miriam, and the rest of Bnei Israel bitterly complaining about Moshe. That's what they did. They went in the back and they complained. Yet none of those things matter. They don't matter. We all complain. We complain about this one. We complain about that one. But what came out of all of this is that everyone else was forgiven for what they did. But Korach alone became the definition of one who is a bitter complainer. For that, he got what he deserved. So in the storyline, it begins with a verbal gauntlet thrown down before Moshe and Aaron. In Bamidbar 16:3, it says, "You have too much power. The entire community is holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourself above God's assembly?" In other words, you guys are too powerful. You're abusing your power. How do you raise yourself above all of us? We're all here. This is God's assemblage. This is all of us. It's not just your people. It's our people. It's God's people. So one frustration that we readers have, at least I do, of the Torah, when we read the Torah, we read this book, it has no ending. It has a bunch of endings. It doesn't have an ending. I always like, up here it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I like that. When I have a beginning, a middle, and no end, or five endings, it drives me crazy. How do you do that? Especially in the Torah. How do you do that? But each ending comes after Moshe unsuccessfully tries to calm down his challengers. He tries to calm them down every single time, and they're not having it. Nope, we want this. You can't have that. But he couldn't. And they were swallowed up and buried in the earth by a supernatural force. Still, others were consumed by fire, as I told you. The broader community then picked up the rallying cry, saying to Moshe and Aharon in Bamidbar 17:6, "You have brought death upon God's people." It was as if they were saying, "Now look what you two have done." Or, as that great comedic duo used to say, Laurel and Hardy, "What a fine mess you've gotten me into." It's kind of like that, except it's not funny. Maybe New York City just did that. We have to wait and see. But as a result of being punished by God, they became subject to a devastating plague that left over 14,000 dead. Finally, Aharon was able to stop the disaster. Finally. How? By planting a staff in the ground and growing almonds out of it. Isn't that interesting? That's one ending. Anyway, the grand finale happens when we are shown the priestly and Levitical responsibilities, that they have things to do that they're responsible for. And on the 12 tribal walking staffs that had been placed and then removed from the tent of meeting. And as I said, only Aharon's was the one that represented the house of Levi and came alive and began to bloom the rich, fragrant almond blossoms. You know what the problem is? Korach was also a Levi. Not just Moshe and Aaron and Miriam. Korach was a Levi. Like I said, what kind of an ending is this? There is no ending. But God's response to all this is shorter and emotionally much more powerful than the initial challenge. Unlike the first challenge that temporarily had shaken Bnei Israel, God's response had permanence and promise, as it commands in Bamidbar chapter 17, verse 25. Don't believe me? Go look. Bamidbar chapter 17, verse 25. It says, "Put Aharon's staff back in front of the gathering. Let this be a lesson to the rebels, so that their grumblings come to an end, and that they do not die." A staff growing almonds. Anyway, the rabbis of the Talmud are clearly interested in this. So am I. So is everybody. I mean, you can't help it. They realized it would be up to them to fill in some of the gaps that the story leaves behind. So these are our sages, and they argued, and they argued, and they argued. And one of the most important questions that the rabbis wanted to address was the apparent lack of an explanation that the Torah provides for why Korach did this. Why? You know, the answers are not as important as the right questions sometimes. You can answer 100 questions with the right answer, but if you don't have the right question, it doesn't matter. The answers don't matter. This is a good question. Why did Korach do it? What were his motives? So the sages tell us how Korach challenged Moshe to a halachic duel using visual words. In other words, they argued using law, Jewish law, that was already available at the time, based on the mitzvot. So they paint a verbal picture that allows us to imagine that we can hear the great debate that discusses everything from why do we need tzitzit, why, to who decides who is ritually clean. Yeah, who decides that? One of the most interesting commentaries is the one that tells us that the rabbis put the following words in Korach's mouth. And it says, "The Torah is not from heaven, neither is Moshe God's prophet, nor is Aharon God's priest." It's an interesting argument. See what he did? The Torah is not from heaven. Okay. Either is Moshe. Now he's trying to say that. And God's prophet. He's not. Moshe's not God's prophet. Nor is Aharon God's priest. Interesting. Right? See what he's doing? He's twisting things. He's making a false comparison. So this phrase reminds us of another Talmudic passage in which they tell a story of Rabbi Eliezer. Interesting story. I love this one. And it describes Rabbi Eliezer calling upon the heavens to prove that his argument is correct, whatever that argument was about at the time. Doesn't matter. He says, come on, make sure everybody knows that my argument is right. And that's kind of like what Korach did. When Reb Eliezer calls out to God, he is greeted with supernatural events that immediately begin to happen. A carob tree is uprooted and flies around the group. A river flows backwards. And everybody's woo. And the very walls of the Beit Midrash are caused to slant dangerously, as if they're going to fall on the people in the room. And this happened even though those who dared to challenge Reb Eliezer's irrefutable halachic authority were severely punished. In other words, he's saying to them, I'm right, and here the heavens have just proven it to you. Finally, one of Reb Eliezer's more formidable challengers was obviously unconcerned by the voice of the heaven. He didn't care. He stood up against Reb Eliezer and he quoted a similar sentiment that was attributed to Korach. This guy Korach, man, he was good. The Torah is not in heaven, and we pay no attention to a divine voice. The Torah is not in heaven, and we pay no attention to a divine voice. I don't mean Korach was a good person. I mean he was a good arguer. So, if the Torah is not in heaven, we don't have to pay attention to this. For that, Reb Eliezer was punished with excommunication by the rabbis, despite all the apparent proof that he demonstrated. He got excommunicated. So Reb Eliezer lives in the rabbinic imagination as a revered figure who serves as a wellspring of many of the teachings recorded in the Talmud. He was one of the most prolific and agreed with rabbis. But here, his original status as a teacher seems to protect his legacy. Korach, on the other hand, enters the rabbinic imagination as a distrustful whistleblower. Oh, a whistleblower you can't trust. Well, there's a problem there. To be sure, the rabbis explain that Korach introduced himself as a person of great refinement. And he was. If you look at Korach, it's hard to disagree with him. His arguments are good. They're well articulated. He looks good. He's very presentable. But he was a very learned man, and he knew and used Torah well enough to offer popular challenges to the prevailing wisdom of the day. Like we do today. There are people in the street hungry that don't have health care. There are wars we shouldn't get involved in. There's too many rich people, and the poor people, the gap is too great. Those are popular challenges that people are using today. That's what Korach was doing. And even though he could impress the masses, there had to be something about him that the people who knew him did not trust, since he was passed over for leadership within his own family. Even his own family wouldn't put him as the leader of the family. He was not the leader of his tribe. He wasn't. So what we all learn from this is a model for the kind of people we would want as our leaders. We learn who we would like to become the heads of corporations and governments. We learn that we need our leaders to reject complacency, call attention to the issues, and, at the risk of censure and punishment, call the authorities to account. The one thing we never want to accept are answers that sound like, but it was always done that way, and it should always come that way. That's an answer we should never, ever accept. Yes, there is a difference between them. There is a difference. There's a difference between people like that and a true whistleblower. There is. Doing the right thing is not enough. What matters is the reason we are doing what we do. Whistleblowing to gain power is wrong. Whistleblowing to support greed is wrong. However, working together to make things just a little bit better. By the way, that's what Judaism teaches. Our job is to make things a little bit better. That helps make the world so much better for all of us. If each of us does one little thing to improve the world, one little thing, how much better would the world be? So perhaps the story of this rebellion, complex though it is, no question about it, it offers a very simple lesson about how important our basic freedom is to challenge authority and restore injustice wherever we may find it. But when we do, we must always make sure that our motives are for the greater good and not for our own personal gain. That is why we should not do things. And I'm going to say this. If you ever meet a politician of either party who understands that, I would love to meet that person. Okay. Oh my God. It's so corrupt. Anywhere in the world, not just here.